Thank you, Brandan. Please remain on the stage as we're now about to start our panel discussion. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back on the stage John Monks, the head of social and digital business design global at DigitasLBi, and Anne-Marie Tomchak, a reporter and presenter on BBC Trending.
Thanks, guys, for sharing some brilliant insights there. We're going to continue this conversation on because we want to know a little bit more. I'm sure if you're like me, you would like to know more about how YouTube works and the potential for it, and also more about teenagers. And please do feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions during our discussion. Brendan, you touched on how brands are using YouTube and how huge the celebrities are on YouTube, these digital celebrities, for a whole new generation. What do you think brands are not doing that's making them not get into the top 10?
I think that's a good question. I feel like we were talking about this yesterday, it's kind of like a shift in mindset. Oftentimes brands and advertisers think about content as kind of this self-contained story, and everybody's pushing storytelling, and that's important. But I think the big thing that's happening here is people want to be a part of a community, and that's far more powerful than creating a one-off, single, beautiful piece of content.
So you're saying that people don't really care if the content doesn't look beautiful, so long as they can connect to it.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of the reason these guys develop such a massive fan base is they're great at almost developing relationships with their fans, and they talk to the camera almost as if they're like talking to someone, so people feel as if like, hey, this is my friend. It's not just some actor on TV. It's somebody that I really care about and cares about me. Yeah,
so it's about building a community, isn't it, when you think about how connected YouTubers are to their subscribers. They don't think of them necessarily as a subscriber. It's part of a community where it's not just putting a video up on a screen and broadcasting out to a certain community. It's a two-way street, isn't it?
Absolutely.
John?
And I think that's a super point, and I think it's really fascinating, this use of celebrities in the new media, as you put it. And I think So I think it's used very well at the core of this is as a brand partnership, and those have been around for a very long time. It's just you can do things with this brand partnership that you could never do before. And there's some really interesting work being done with sponsorship of Andy Murray around some, I'm not a tennis follower, but there's some sports thing going on, and he's brand ambassador for an insurance company, which is kind of weird setup, but it's a Scottish insurance company. And what they've done there is kind of build into their contract kind of how he's going to react to the data that they get through the social channels. So it's not simply we pay you X million, you sign some photos and we'll tweet you occasionally. This is we're going to watch what our audience, how they react, what they feel about that, and then we're going to adapt that. So it's interesting, you can do that with a big
So if it's not working, scrap it. It's like what you were saying earlier, and that also what you said earlier, Brandan, about it's not just about throwing loads of cash at this. It's about being in the space.
Yeah, and I think that's where the individuals have a bit of an advantage. It's like they don't need to deal with the bureaucracy. They can just be like, all right, cool, I'll film something different tomorrow. Yeah. Wipe my hands clean of it and call it a day. And big organizations and brands don't necessarily have that luxury. No.
And I think that's a super point. And the other part of it is you talked, both of you, about the ability of individuals on YouTube to be able to kind of present this kind of scrappy around the edges, less professional feel, and absolutely that works very well. And I think a key part to that is it feels genuine.
Yeah.
So I think what can be done by a vlogger is different to what can be done by Andy Murray or Kim Kardashian, and it for sure is different to what can be done by Amex. So people are not going to want to see American Express and feel like it's kind of just half-baked. They're going to want a different level of quality. So I think you do have to be quite careful in terms of the strategy when you're thinking about what are you actually going to do in putting your brand out there.
There have been some really successful advertisements recently on YouTube which appear to have been made specifically for those people who are consuming content on YouTube. And you take, for example, Always, which makes sanitary towels. It recently had a video which used the hashtag #LikeAGirl, and it tapped into this whole discussion about gender equality, the gender debate about the place of women in society and what should they be like, and made a very cinematic piece about what it's like to be a girl. But it was very much presented as a piece of cinema or a piece of film, not overtly branded. You only realise that you were in fact watching an ad by the very end. And I've noticed this trend happening quite a lot, where a very important part of the social conversation is chosen, in this instance gender equality, and B, it's presented not like an ad. So do you think that's the new formula for success?
I don't think it's necessarily, is it branded or is it not? I feel like it's more, is the brand providing value? Because if the brand puts their stamp on something and it's awesome, it doesn't matter if it's the brand sponsored it. I think people are used to.
People will like it anyway. They've
Yeah.
enjoyed it, but that might not necessarily make them go out and buy the product.
Maybe not, but it certainly is getting something in front of them, and probably doesn't hurt. But it's better than, I think, oftentimes, like, I think of it as like the candy with the medicine. It's like you've got to give something to get something. And oftentimes brands get that mixed up a little bit, especially in digital and social, where it's like you can click on anything and find whatever you want. So why should I watch this ad? It's got to be providing something for me.
Yeah.
And just a really quick one on that. I think, because actually some of the times you describe that, and I see some of these things online, and it makes me feel a little bit kind of uncomfortable that you've got this thing and you thought it was one thing and then it turns into an advert.
You cheated at the end.
God, yeah, absolutely. And what we found in that piece of research was actually those teens really don't care whether it's a branded message. Like at the end of it, they don't mind nearly as much as I do. And I think maybe that kind of goes back. You talk about the shift from the last presentation was Mad Men to Math Men, like this shift of the old media to new media. But there's still, there's been a brilliant history of just brilliant, beautiful ideas created in advertising. And those are the things that have value that people will enjoy watching. And if what comes at the end is an always hashtag, then that's great, you enjoyed yourself. And also people have very little patience for bad content. You don't sit and watch it.
They're more discerning now. Let's talk a little bit about consumer behaviour. I've heard lots of people talking about big data and using the information, how you use that information to extract and target the audience. But if you look at some of the biggest social media trends that have happened, for example, over the past 12 months, let's take the hashtag no makeup selfie, for example, or the ice bucket challenge. These were hugely successful campaigns that appeared to have happened by accident somewhat, and they resulted in millions and millions of pounds for charities. Now I'm sure there are lots of companies who would absolutely love to bottle that up, that formula.
Who wouldn't?
Who
would not
want that? What is the
that?
formula? So what can they learn from trends like this?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You saw, there's a subject really close to my heart. I'm on the board of a charity, and part of the reason I'm there is to lead it through digital transformation. So it's a whole sector that's really stuck in the old world. And there's a great danger, I think, with that no makeup selfie. And I told you this story before, but this was run by Cancer Research UK, one of the biggest charities in the UK, and it was just jumping on the back of a meme that was going on the internet anyway. They did it very quickly and it was great. But it wasn't their campaign, they just had a strategy set up for it. And interestingly, 2 other charities that I know of had the same strategy, and they were just too late. It took too long. So I think there's one thing, which is how you have to have the culture in the organisation to be able to permit that and not take 2 days approving it. You've got to have process that just allows it to happen. It's not, you've got to send it to the lawyers and we'll see what will happen. So there are those pieces in there. The other big danger, I think, though, is all of the charity world is sitting looking at ice bucket challenging it. I want that. And in reality, they are once in a blue moon. They are very, very rare. So it's the ability to jump on something that's automatically happening, not letting that, you could look at that as really misguided wishful thinking. Like, I'm going to sit around forever and wait for the next internet meme to jump on the back of, and the reality is that's generally very unsuccessful. And if you're a big brand, you can get around that by spending a lot of money on your media. That's less acceptable in the charity space. So I think lots and lots of implications of that. And for sure, when it works, it's brilliant.
Brendan, you mentioned that when young people in the US were asked about who are their top celebrities, in the top 5, they were all YouTubers. Now, not everyone here will be watching YouTube, I'm assuming. We've all come across YouTube at some point or other, but that doesn't mean we're consuming it all the time. So should brands be targeting these really big names, or are there lots of other people with, say, 50,000 subscribers that they could be looking at too?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because now there's so much attention on the space. Brands are putting a lot of money into it, and as a result, a lot of the people on the top, there are a few recognizable names kind of within each vertical that have made the cover of Ad Age and Adweek and Variety, and so those guys.
Who are those names for those who wouldn't be familiar with YouTube? And what are they doing?
Well, I think the ones that I showed in the presentation were like Bethany Moda, who's a big makeup vlogger, Jenna Marbles, Shane Dawson. They do comedy skits mostly and video blogs. Michelle Phan, who's another makeup and beauty vlogger. Trying to think I think those were the big ones, and then PewDiePie obviously and Smosh. So there are kind of these huge stars that kind of sit at the top of each of their categories, and every brand right now is kind of vying for their attention, and supply and demand. I mean, there's only so many of them, and there's a lot of advertisers right now who want them. So if you broke it down on a cost per view basis, you would probably be better off scratching beneath the surface a little bit and going for people who are probably a little bit more relevant, a little bit, are potentially less diluted with other brand
more
deals and that type of thing. Yeah, and more accessible.
Okay. And it's not just YouTube, really. When you think about the platforms that the younger demographic are using, a lot of the research would indicate that Instagram and Snapchat are extremely popular.
Yep.
So the challenge for brands is how do you actually reach and engage and target that audience, because Instagram is, the reason it's popular is because it's easy to use and because people are not bombarded with brands in the same way as they are perhaps on Facebook, when you have the algorithm which tracks how you're using your computer, and then you suddenly see an ad for shoes if you've been looking up shoes online earlier that day. So what can people do and use this information? How can they harness that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, again, it's a huge topic. It's very poorly understood, I think. There was a great quote from that Medium article that you referenced, which was the young people, these are Americans, saying...
This was Medium,
which is a blogging platform, effectively.
Right, and they got a teenager to write about their thoughts on social media from a teenager's perspective.
Exactly. And what this guy was saying effectively was, he had a brilliant quote about Facebook saying it was basically your parents' dinner party that you couldn't get out of. Like, you had to be there, but actually you didn't want to be there. So but
then you don't want to not be there either.
Oh, well, you can't not be there. So I think it was that the Facebook for that American audience was very, very valuable in terms of being the platform, the place in which you'd go and find Anne-Marie in Snapchat, and then you go off and chat with her there. So you go off into a different world, but you've had to authenticate there. And then the other thing, which I think is a really big thing to think about there, is it's very easy just to think that the world is America. The platforms are American for sure, but the reality is the use of those platforms really does vary very, very widely as you move around the world, and I'd be really fascinated to see what it's like here. But for ActionAid, I was in Myanmar a few weeks ago, and there, Twitter is nothing, Facebook is everything. Everybody is on Facebook, and it's a real youth platform, whereas certainly in the UK and the US, Facebook's kind of like, what your dad does, and things have moved on. For a market like that, YouTube doesn't exist because there simply isn't the infrastructure to provide it. So it's very interesting, particularly when many of you may be thinking about how do you create new ideas that you can scale out to the world, or what might work in Central Europe, like that's going to work in the Romanian market and also in Slovakia and all these different places. That actually you've got to be quite sensitive to the way those platforms are used there and the data you're going to be seeing, and what does it mean.
Right, so and how developed the consumer is, and how big smartphone penetration is in certain sectors and certain regions. For example, if you look at Facebook, it's very, very popular in parts of the Middle East and in some of the African countries as well. Similarly with Twitter, it's huge in Kenya, for example, in Turkey, in other regions. So it's about targeting, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, what do you think that people can learn from? Well, you did this small study with a small group of young people. What can they learn about the behaviour that it reveals online? So we grew up in an age where, well, at least I grew up when social media wasn't around. Revealing a little bit about my age now, but I remember what it was like to be a young person, and so you're coping with so many extra things now. You've so many platforms. It is literally like a tidal wave. What can the research that you looked into tell us about how teenagers are behaving, and what can you do with that information?
Well, I think the two really big things are, first of all, they are telling you a huge amount. Like they're telling their friends.
Right. So privacy is not as important.
Not really as
to that demographic.
Not really as important. I think the platform is there to make connections. That's what it's all about. So it's valuable for that. Unless you put information on the platform, no connection can be made. So I think, although it's not as academic as that, there's generally a feeling that you put everything out there. So first of all, there's a huge amount of knowledge about all of these young people that's actually just there if you know where to look and how to use it. The other thing which I think is interesting about that is that the brands can kind of take information they already have. So there's a great opportunity, I think, to say, okay, we've got a huge amount of data about how our consumers behave. We've got a lifetime's worth of research. So what might be possible if we then think about the behavior that we can observe in social media, even if it has to be kind of a little bit like some of it is data, some of it is insight, some of it is ethnographics, and putting all of those things together to get a good picture of those people, and then try some stuff and see what happens.
Brandan, do you see YouTube as being the premier video platform? I've noticed that a lot of other social platforms like Tumblr and Facebook have introduced a lot of video functionality now. So the landscape is constantly changing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think video has become the de facto form of communication more and more. When you look at it, it's like Snapchat, Tumblr added video, Facebook added video, Instagram added video. I think
it's the language that people want to speak.
Yeah, nobody's writing as much as they used to. It's just like, why? You can just like film a video and then send it out and you're done. So I think whether it's YouTube, which is at this point just like a behemoth and I don't think going anywhere, I do think everything cropping up will be video or incorporate video more and more on some level.
And are you looking primarily at the US market? Where do you see it going globally?
I think probably the same. Everybody's getting more and more access to smartphones, and really every single platform is integrating video. Twitter video, that was the other one I forgot. That just rolled out like a month ago.
Fine.
Yeah.
And of live streaming now, is anyone being using Meerkat or Periscope? You live streaming us? Have we any questions from the audience? Anyone like to ask a question to either of our panelists here? No? Oh, I see a lady here in the front. Got a microphone for you now. This question is directed at Brandan.
Yeah. Should I repeat it?
Yes, please.
Yeah. My question is, so you talked mainly about the young audiences, the ones that grew up in the social media sphere and the internet. But what if we're trying to target the older ones that they are interested in gadgets, they have smartphones, everything, because they are trying to catch up with the world. But let's say they're in their late 30s, the 40s, late 20s. How should we relate to them? they're a little bit different in their mentality from the young teenagers.
So what? It's not a one-size-fits-all
But they know the world
approach.
is on digital now, and how does it differ? The advertising, targeting them, the video,
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
I think, yeah, YouTube isn't everything, but it's more and more and more. I mean, it definitely skews a lot younger, but YouTube specifically is being aggressive about capturing the older audience. But I mean, to the quote you mentioned earlier, I mean, across the board, everybody is getting on to these platforms, and I think Facebook is probably the one that is doing the best job capturing the older audience, and from there, adoption, just spreads out. So I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, right now, radio isn't dead, TV's not dead, but it's
But the way in which people consume those mediums
Yeah.
is changing.
yeah.
You only need to look at Netflix and other operators where consumer habits have changed. People now binge on a whole television series in one evening, whereas before we would wait for a scheduled broadcast. And so social and digital media is responding in a similar way, where you have these scheduled broadcasts on YouTube, but you also have sporadic videos that will go really big.
And I mean, I think that's an amazing question, because it's like, everyone focuses on the youth market. You will know this, I know this. The industry is full of kids that want to, talk to other kids, and like, you would be forgiven for believing that the world is made up entirely of people under the age of 30 who have an iPhone or a Samsung or and that's really missing, a huge part of the people who want, actually, they've got things that they want to do that may actually be very well enabled by digital. There's a really super example. I'm working with Amsterdam City about how they create the sharing capital of the world. That's a vision that the mayor has there in Amsterdam. And there's what's evident in terms of sharing resources is actually the older people, and here they're talking 50, 60-ish. Those people have got a huge amount of resources, and they're not uncomfortable with the idea of sharing them, like lending out their power tool or doing things like that. So they're kind of comfortable with it, but there's a real barrier to that entry in terms of having this service presented in a way that feels like the risk level is low. So there's a very different appetite to risk. It feels like it's for them, it's not just for the kids. So I think there's real insight to be gained there. It's harder to get that from digital. You can't do the same thing because they're not posting their every move in social channels. They're probably sitting watching to see their grandkids' photos. So I think there is stuff to be done there. That was going to rely, I think, a little bit more on kind of traditional research, but nonetheless, you can still test and learn.
Okay, so
does that help?
joining the dots between offline and online
Absolutely.
world. Our microphone is
Now,
working.
so Brandan, you say the stars of the youth are on YouTube. Do you think the older audiences as well can relate to such stardom stuff? Do they have their own stars on YouTube?
I think probably if you're over 35, you probably don't look at YouTube stars the same way. But I think that's just a matter of time.
Plus, there are lots of really big shows that have a really good YouTube offering and other platforms. For example, the Jimmy Kimmel Show or the Ellen DeGeneres Show. There are lots of content that exists on television which has its own YouTube offering as well, and big broadcasters, the BBC included, have their YouTube offering.
Yeah, and I think eventually they're just going to be one and the same. It's not going to be like TV's gone and phased out. I mean, more and more people are using connected TVs, and to that point, it's like no major TV network has a big show that does not also have some sort of a YouTube strategy and YouTube footprint. So I think probably older, it's going to be more blending of the two.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for your question. I think we're running out of time now. I see one more hand up there, and another. Okay, we'll take these two questions and we'll have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Hiya. I just have a question about, because I'm actually a subscriber of Phil and PewDiePie, and I watch them as well, sometimes regularly. But what I see in YouTube is that the situation is a bit delicate when it comes to sponsorships and brands, as in if it's not relevant to the content, then the writer will be seen as a sellout, or he could use subscribers. So do you think that is likely to change as more and more brands come into the YouTube scene?
I think going back to that point earlier, like, it's okay if you're adding value. And you don't want to just shoehorn your brand into any channel. The best way to do a brand integration is one where 3 parties win: the audience, the creator, and the brand. If it's 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3, somebody's going to be unhappy. So, most of the creators are actually pretty good about saying, no, this isn't relevant, I'm going to pass. So I know in the work that I do, we definitely try and be very selective, because that is such an issue.
Thank you very much.
And the lady with the yellow top just over there on the right.
Hi, Brandan, I would like your advice for an idea, and because you mentioned you work in the game industry a few years ago, you mentioned sport. My question as a marketer is if I can use a game in order to build the foundation of my brand. For example, we had Second Life a few years ago, and do you think this might be a trend, or in your markets it has been a success for some of the brands, maybe not the biggest, but what is your opinion? Thank you.
It's already happened, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's huge. Like, gaming, I think, accounts for like 15% of all YouTube videos. It's crazy. But if you are leveraging a game to kind of power your own content, for lack of a better term, you do need to be a little bit careful, because a lot of the gaming companies, they basically file claims because they technically have ownership for for the content. So if you're posting video of game footage, a lot of the game companies go into YouTube and basically say, like, oh, I own that, and they claim it, and then that video they can monetize, not you. So something to keep in mind.
Okay,
Great.
but
Well, if you've any further questions, you can chat to either of our panelists after this discussion, and you can always reach them online. That's all we have time for today, but thank you very much to John Monks and to Brandan Gahan. Thanks for being with us this afternoon, and thanks to you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.